Let's talk about a few of the shocks that have happened so far because there has been an abundance of them. And I think one of the biggest ones has been Novak Djokovic. Novak Djokovic lost to Botic van der Zandschulp 6-2, 3-6, 6-1. Now, this is the second consecutive year he has lost to a lucky loser in Indian Wells. He was defeated by Luca Nardi last time out in California. And now, BVZ has defeated him. BVZ. I mean, we're gonna talk about him in a little bit more in a bit because he's got some claims to fame over the last 6 months or so with big upsets. But just talking about Novak Djokovic first, I mean, Chris, what did you make of his performance and the fact that he went down in 3 sets? Coupled with the fact that, he had that Berrettini loss as well. I think he's on a 3-match losing streak at the moment. I know I'm sort of dramatizing things and actually that's maybe no kind of real cause for concern. But when you're talking about this in terms of Novak Djokovic, lucky losers as well, it's not a good sign, is it?
It's not the best of signs, but having said that, he did obviously lose to a lucky loser and then go on and win Olympic gold. So it doesn't mean he can't necessarily reach another Grand Slam final. He did that last year following a run of pretty poor form as well. Didn't start the year well last year. Hasn't really started the year that well this year, even though he's played a little bit more, a few more tournaments along the way. I mean, it is just a bit surprising because he's got this Murray partnership that they're quite fond of, but it doesn't necessarily look like it's translating to results necessarily. I know that this is the first week they're back united together. For the Sunshine Swing. He will be playing Miami, which he pulled out of last year. So there's a chance when you have the Sunshine Double, it's rare that people do well at both. So that might be something that might kind of lift spirits. In a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about him lifting the trophy. Who knows? But from a performance perspective, he did not look particularly happy or particularly motivated out there. And the numbers were not great. I mean, we talk about how good a returner he is. It's not the quickest courts in the world. And that's something that many players have been talking about. But on return, I mean, Djokovic was pretty weak. He only won, I think it was off the second serve. Botic van der Zandschulp actually won 85% of second serve points won, whereas Novak Djokovic won 33. Wow. So not returning that well and not serving that well. And I mean, for Djokovic, the return is his bread and butter when it comes to his tennis. So when that's not working, it does make you think, hang on a minute, something's not right. Having said that, it's probably not his favorite conditions. And I think he was quite vocal on that.
Yeah, I mean, 16 winners to 37 unforced errors in total. He did
That
speak
is bad,
about,
isn't it, Joel?
it's not great. It's not great. And I think particularly I mean, we're going to get onto it now. I mean, talking about the court surface, I mean, I think it's been quite funny in the fact that going into the tournament, we were talking about it being a faster...
Quickest year ever.
Yeah, quickest year ever, potentially faster surface. And actually, the players have said, the complete opposite. I mean, Medvedev said it's the slowest court he's ever played on. And, Djokovic didn't necessarily go that far. But do you feel like the court also had a hand in the manner of the defeat for Djokovic?
I mean, if he'd not been practicing on centre court, he did raise that point that it's bouncing a lot higher on centre court than some of the outside courts. He said higher than some of the highest clay courts,
Wow.
Which he said he found very difficult to play against. So maybe the kicker serves are doing particularly well here. Maybe that's why his return wasn't as good on the second serve from Botic's delivery. It's hard to really know, but he was not finding his rhythm. He was very transparent about that afterwards. I think in terms of the speed of the court, maybe a quicker court surface hasn't actually led to better quality play because unforced errors were always a problem here. But we're seeing unforced error numbers that are so high from some of these matches from players who aren't normally hitting that many unforced errors. The same was true for Casper. I think he was well into the 50s in terms of unforced errors when he crashed out. So it does make you think that it might be tennis paradise, but it might not be a tennis player's paradise.
No, and I sort of think with Djokovic, he's lost some of that pace. I think that was there like a few years ago that ultimately led him to be a 5-time champion in Indian Wells, and I think he finds it maybe a little bit more difficult now to generate that pace. And when you're on a slow court as slow as this, it's almost like an essential tool to have, but he's not quite finding it. So I wonder if that was a kind of a contributing factor as well. But just talking about Botic van der Zandschulp, I mean, he has had quite a run over the last 6 months because he's defeated last man to defeat Novak Djokovic, last man to defeat Rafael Nadal, and he defeated also Carlos Alcaraz at the US Open. So as much as this, was a bad day at the office, I guess, for Novak Djokovic, Botic van der Zandschulp does have credentials when it comes to massive shocks.
He really does. I mean, he just never played Federer. Otherwise, I mean, he really would be completing the set there when it comes to the GOATs of the game. I feel like from when we've seen him play previously, he does like a big match, a big matchup. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to win the matches on the tour when there isn't all that focus there. It's almost like when there's a point to prove, he brings his A game. And the rest of the time, he's quite happily quite a mid player a lot of the time. So, I mean, for his career, he's definitely got some highlights, but he wouldn't want to be winning these matches from, 85 in the world. I think he'd want to be right up there in the top 50. I mean, he should be a top 30 player, really, if he could play more consistently on the tour throughout the year. But take nothing away from the fact that he's got some fantastic wins. And he definitely is a name that in the last 6 months, as you say, a lot of people will be taking note of.
Yeah. He's carved a little bit of history, I feel, on the tour with some of his performances. Exactly. I mean, it's. I think with Indian Wells, it's been particularly baffling because in the qualifying, he actually got bageled by a player outside the top 200 in the final round of qualifiers. So it just shows how different.
That's not a great look, is it, for Djokovic? Having said that, no.
And I guess, before we move on, I mean, the final question I was going to ask is, does this make you think with Novak Djokovic coming back to Grand Slams, can he still win Grand Slam titles?
I think he can. I think he can definitely put himself in contention. I'm really at a bit of a loss unless it's motivation that is missing for him, because the game shouldn't be. Obviously, age catches up to you, but I'm not sure why it would have happened in the way that it's happened to him, given the fact that he has been so good at managing his body over the years. It does just feel like there's something a little bit lost in the focus side of things. So I'm still with what he did last year and what Billie Jean King believes he should do. Pick the one you want to win, put everything into trying to win that. And whether that is another Wimbledon title, whether that's Roland Garros or the US Open, but put yourself in the best situation to try and win one more as opposed to be a top player. And I think he is thinking like that. But I do think it is harder to motivate yourself when everything you've ever wanted to achieve, you have achieved. And we did talk about this post the Olympics. What will happen? How will his game change? Because it is a very different scenario to be in where you're no longer chasing anything.
Well, age may be catching up with Novak Djokovic, but sadly for Nick Kyrgios, a reoccurring injury caught up with him because he suffered a wrist injury in his match against Botic van der Zandschulp. He retired 7-6, 3-love down. He was visibly upset when he was speaking to the trainer. I think he was very aware that this was about his right wrist, which he had surgery on back in 2023. Yeah, Chris, this was not a nice kind of viewing experience to watch. See a player like Nick kind of unravel on the tennis court and leave us so, I guess, uncertain in relation to his future. What was your kind of take on the Nick Kyrgios kind of retirement, the injury, the fact that it's a recurring injury? Where's your head at with regards to this? Because a lot of people are kind of talking about this in the realms of like, it's great that he's tried to make a comeback, but it's going to be very tough going.
I think he needs to think about what he really wants and what the reality is, because before he even stepped onto court, I don't think many people thought he would complete this match, because he'd already spoken about the fact that wrist injuries had not gone away. They had not improved despite the fact that he had taken some time off the tour, having returned in Australia. So maybe he tried to come back a bit sooner in Australia, but it seems like it's done more damage than good. It doesn't look like he's able to be competitive across multiple sets in the way that he previously was able to. And I think you have to really think, and maybe those tears were him realizing that maybe it's actually not going to be possible for him to compete again at the highest level consistently. So tough scenes to watch. You don't want to see anyone kind of as devastated like that in front of like so many people. Again, we're not Kyrgios sympathizers. We are someone who wants to see people get back to the form they once showed. And I'm not sure that that's something that is realistic for him now. And I'm not sure he's someone who's always put in the rehab work or the work required or the discipline. It's not an Andy Murray who can rehab a hip injury. I think wrist injuries are different and they do require an awful lot of discipline and patience. And I'm not sure that he necessarily has that. Or the desire is also.
Yeah, I mean, the wrist injury he suffered, I think there's kind of talk out there saying that no one's ever come back from that sort of injury. But I think if you look at, I think about kind of the Dominic Thiem situation when he came back from what I think actually was a less severe wrist injury, but still had a massive impact, on his career
and his mentality.
Yeah, and his mentality and his confidence. And you think about, the Kyrgios game with his forehand and his big serve. And, it sort of requires and demands, getting that extra pop puts a lot of strain on that wrist. And I think it just shows how, almost like wrist injuries are like the worst type of injuries tennis players can get, because, looking at kind of the Dominic Thiem situation, it is like you're never, scarily, like you might never come back as the same tennis player ever again.
And I think that was also the same with like Laura Robson. I think it really is something that can be completely career ending from a day in, day out perspective. And maybe that is true, that maybe there is this, let's give it a last chance. Let's give it a go, see what I can do. And the realization that it might not work out, I think, is probably pretty devastating.